Hey there, fellow classic comic collectors. As always, I'm Scott Harris King, and today I'm going to be talking about the longest running subplots in comic history. Now, of course, I haven't read every comic in history, so I am just going to be focusing on one that I have read, which is the longest running subplot that I personally know about. Before I get into that, I do want to mention um, normally I do 2 videos a week. I try and put one on Monday and then the other one either on Thursday or Friday. And I missed one. I missed one last week, mainly because I was finally finishing, after like 10 months of work, I finally was putting the finishing touches on the newest issue of my series, The Crime Busters, and I had a hard deadline of January 31st to get that out. So I was just grinding around the clock and I didn't have time to record a video. So I'm sorry that everyone missed that, but that's done now. It's off to the printer, so that's very exciting for me. All completed. And so I should have more time now to get back to the YouTubing. So just to let you know, going forward, we'll get back on the 2 videos. I'm sorry I missed that. And hopefully that you weren't just waiting by your computer, pressing the refresh button over and over for 48 hours, wondering where I had gone to. I'm still here. But today, back in business with a look at one of the longest running subplots in comic history. Now, I want to make a distinction here. I'm not talking about plot points that were forgotten and then picked up by a later writer. I'm talking about ongoing concerns, stories that are still going within the comic. They haven't forgotten about it. It's continuing to go on, and it just never resolves. So, for instance, one storyline that was completely forgotten about and then later picked up, for instance, in the Amazing Adventures with the Inhumans issue that ran, issues like 1 to 10 or 11, I think. 1 to 10, I think, was the Inhumans. There was a thing at the end of that where this human had befriended Black Bolt and he was like kidnapped into space, and then they just never mentioned it again. And so that was like 1972, and never mentioned again until Mark Grunwald, who loved that sort of thing, finally resolved the story in pages of Quasar, like Quasar number 14 in the early 90s. So there's like a 20-year gap where this character disappeared and the Inhumans were like, who cares? Humans, whatever. And so I'm not talking about that sort of thing. I'm talking about a storyline that's continued to be referenced and developed, an ongoing subplot, and it just drags out forever. One of the longest and probably most famous ones is the origin of Wolverine. Of course, Wolverine first appears Hulk 180, and quickly in the X-Men. It takes a little while before they even start to get into it. I forget what issue it is, maybe 104 or something. There's a thing where one of the leprechauns knows that his name is Logan, and that's where you start to be like, oh yeah, what is the deal with this guy? We don't know anything about him, and that's where they sort of start in bits and pieces doling it out. And it's not until, in the early 90s we get the Weapon X storyline, which finally fills in the part of his history where he gets the adamantium skeleton and the claws and stuff. Though he still doesn't have his memory until the Wolverine origin storyline came out at the end of 2001 and into 2002. So that was an ongoing subplot that dragged out for over 25 years. It was around 25, 26 years. So that's a long time for a subplot to be dragged out, right? But it's not the longest because, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't read Warlord, I'm going to be getting into some heavy Warlord spoilers here. And we're going to jump right in here because in issue 15 of the Warlord, I've got my box of Warlord here. I'll be pulling these issues out as I talk about it. Issue 15 of Warlord, here's Travis Morgan, the Warlord, and he has been gone for a while. Time passes differently in Skartaris, the mystical land that he's trapped in. And so he had been separated from his wife, common law wife, I suppose, Tara, for what for him was just a very short period of time, but what for her was a much longer period of time. So when they finally reunite, Travis Morgan is shocked to discover that Tara has given birth to a son who they named Joshua. So he shows up and all of a sudden it's been like a whole year for her. She gave birth. Here's an infant. And the infant is immediately kidnapped We can see that on the cover of the next issue 16, where Deimos, Warlord's arch enemy, has the baby, and this becomes the main plot of the story for a little while, culminating in issue 21. Now, in issue Warlord 21, let me pull it out here. You can see that I'm a little rusty with my YouTubing. Here's issue 21, and you can see it says here, Father against Son to the death, and then it says Terminator. You'll notice that he's no longer a little baby. So basically what happens is Deimos uses this Atlantean technology plus his dark magic to age Joshua up to adulthood and have him try and kill his own father. And this is a key moment in the Warlord story, in the development of Travis Morgan. This is something that haunts him for the rest of the character's existence, because when his son attacks him, Warlord defends himself and kills his own son in self-defense. And so he's sort of tortured by this, by feeling like if he was really a good father and really cared, he would have let the son kill him. And so he is haunted by this for the rest of the series and the rest of all of the series that take place with Warlord. But that's not just a character development thing. See, there's actually a subplot that goes on here that starts with this issue, because what Travis Morgan, the Warlord, does not know, but we, the readers, do know, is that this son that he killed wasn't actually his son. It was a clone of his son, yes. So Deimos cloned the baby and then used his whatever to turn the baby into the clone into an adult. And so Warlord killed the clone of his son, but his little baby infant son is still out there, and Deimos seems to get killed in the issue. So what happens is, through a series of events, little baby Joshua becomes adopted by this humble farmer and his wife. They don't know anything about the kid. They just, someone drops the baby off with them or whatever. And so Warlord is going around moping, having this existential crisis. He doesn't know that his son is still alive, but we know, and we also know, when are they going to find out? What's going to happen? Well, here in issue 30, so we're moving along, issue 30, there's a war that begins. You see, this is a war path. And in the war, the farmer and his wife are killed. And so the baby is now like adrift on, the waves of war. And so, but is not killed, and sort of disappears for a little bit, but there's sort of an ongoing, what happened to Warlord's, baby there? What happened to the baby? Well, cut to a few years later, we have this really great storyline that I'm a huge fan of, conspiracy storyline. You can see my copy of issue 56 is signed and remarked by Mark Teixeira, who did the artwork on this one. We get this story, and Warlord is captured by these guys, and he's imprisoned, and they replace him with a doppelganger to overthrow Tara's kingdom, because she is the ruler of the kingdom of Shambhala. Warlord is her consort. And so they put this double in, and Warlord Travis Morgan is freed by this urchin, this Dickensian street urchin called Tinder. So here is the cover issue 58, and you'll see that we have the different characters. Here's Travis, here's Tara, here's a character I'm blanking on what his name is. It's like Grey Malkin or something. I think I got that totally wrong. I'll pretend that was edited out. Here's Tinder. Now you'll notice Tinder's got a wristwatch for the symbol on his tarot card here. That's because Tinder, wait for it, is actually the missing baby. And so Here's Tinder on the cover of issue 59. So it's a few years later. Joshua has grown up a little bit now. He's like 8, 9, 10. It's a little hard to say. And you can see on his arm, he's got the wristwatch. So way back in issue 15, Travis had given Tara this wristwatch from the surface world, from regular Earth, as like a token of his love. And she would wear it like a bracelet, because it was weird and unusual in this mystical land. So she ended up putting it on the baby. And so when the baby disappeared, the wristwatch disappeared as well. Well, here's Tinder. The thing is, you can see Travis Morgan's wearing this big helmet. He can't see out of it. He doesn't know that Tinder, who's helping him, is wearing the wristwatch, which signals that it's actually Joshua, his own son. This is a great storyline, by the way. And then we see here on the cover of 61, at the end of the storyline, there's a big fire, and Travis in the fire finds the wristwatch, and he realizes that Tinder was actually his son, but he thinks that Tinder was killed in the fire, which of course he wasn't, and he never actually saw Tinder. So he still doesn't know. And again, now, if you're following along, it was introduced in issue 15. The storyline has been an ongoing concern throughout. Here we are in issue 61. And so Tinder still alive somewhere, and Warlord now knows that his son, that he didn't sort of kill his son, but he once again thinks his son is dead anyway. So whoops on that. But that's not the end of the storyline. I'm trying to find the next cover to show you here. Basically what happens is there's this huge epic storyline. After Mike Grell leaves the book, the new people come in and they start this super long storyline. Some of the breadcrumbs start being left around issue 73 and in one of the annuals. But it really kicks off in issue 75. And Shambhala is taken over by the Atlanteans, and trying to find it doesn't matter. Shambhala's taken over by the Atlanteans, and all the Warlord and all the refugees, they start fighting this guerrilla war to get Shambhala back, and that runs from issues 75 to 100. So it's this huge epic storyline, and one of the refugees that's with them is Tinder, and there's this ongoing subplot throughout this, basically up in through the issues in the 90s. Tinder sees that Tara is now once again wearing this wristwatch as an armlet to remember her deceased son by, and he doesn't know that's what's going on. All he knows is that this was his as a baby, and since he's lost his family, it's his only connection to this family, because he doesn't know and they don't know, and so he steals the wristwatch. And then there's this whole thing where Tara's like heartbroken. How could someone do this, steal this wristwatch that's so important to her? And so Tinder ends up at one point being like magically like possessed. It's in one of the annuals, but he's not on the cover, so I won't bother showing it. But he gets possessed by this like demonic entity, and Tara ends up getting the wristwatch back, and they once again don't connect. And so this just keeps going on and on and on, and it's still in the background throughout the series, all the way up until the series comes to an end with issue 133. So here's issue 133. Some really good stories here at the end. Michael Fleischer, great writer. Jan Dersima doing the artwork at the end. Really great, except, so here we are. This is what, like 90, it's 88. This is cover dated November 88. This just says winter on it. So it's probably the beginning of 89. So anyway, it doesn't matter when it is, but Warlord 15 came out in 1978. So now here we are. We're a full decade later. We're over 100 issues later. The storyline is left dangling, right? Well, a few years later, Mike Grell returns to the book, and he returns to the book with this 6-part miniseries, The Warlord. Return to the lost world of the Warlord. And once again, I don't think Tinder is on the cover of any of these, which is weird because the entire storyline is actually told from Tinder's point of view, because now we're several years later. Tinder's now an adult, and he's become a bard. And so Tinder has become a bard, and he is trying to learn the truth behind all the legends of Travis Morgan, the warlord. You know, he's this legendary figure, and boy, I have so many weird comics that feature warlord, but he's trying to find out the truth behind warlord. And so every issue is Tinder interviewing the other supporting characters from the series, and it culminates with Demos being brought back from the dead for like the 5th time, and warlord sort of comes out of retirement because he's sort of this grumpy, like disaffected a-hole at this point, and he comes out of retirement and to once again save the day, because that's what he does. And at the end of the series, you're left with the idea that Tinder might know that Travis Morgan is his father, but they still don't actually address it. And so warlord still doesn't know. They've had, like, it's all still up in the air. It's so frustrating. The series, then we have all these issues where warlord is appearing in other comics. So here's warlord in the pages of Aquaman, right? Here's warlord in Aquaman, and here's warlord in the pages of Green Arrow, and warlord shows up in like freaking Teen Titans. And all throughout this, still this unresolved subplot. Finally, we get this series. 2009, right? Grell returns for another warlord series. There was yet another warlord series in between, but I'm not counting that one because that was basically a reboot of the character. Like they started from scratch and they didn't keep any of the continuity, and it wasn't very good. But this is all written by Grell. Awesome Grell covers, like some of Grell's best cover artwork, like some great, like the coloring, like just they're almost like painted almost. And sure enough, Tinder is back, and he's one of the main characters in the series. And finally, in issue 12 of The Warlord, cover dated May 2010, in this story, Travis Morgan finally discovers that Tinder is his son Joshua, who is still alive. And what happens is they're on this mission, and warlord's kind of being an a-hole, and Tinder gets angry at him and like starts taking wild swings with his sword. Now, Travis Morgan, of course, is like the best swordsman in the world, so Tinder knows he's not going to actually hurt warlord. He's just venting his frustration. So he's like, "You son of a bitch." And at that moment, Travis Morgan realizes, oh my god, this isn't my son. This is it. This is Joshua. He's alive. Like, I don't remember. I don't even want to read it right now. But I don't remember how he has that realization. But in that moment, he realizes that Tinder is actually his son, Joshua. And he lets his guard down. And Joshua accidentally stabs him through the heart and kills him. I know. So if you're keeping count, issue 15 started this subplot in 1978. And it runs throughout every version of the character except for the Bart Sears reboot. But every time the character comes back, they continue the subplot until 2010. 32 years. And they finally resolve it here, and they resolve it by, in the moment that they finally reunite, the son kills the father. Now, it's thematically, I get it, because it's a callback to issue 21 from the original series where Travis killed his son. This time it's the other way around, and it's important for Travis as a character because this time he doesn't defend himself. He does what he thinks he should have done the whole time, which is let himself get killed so to save the life of his son. Doesn't quite work for me because they weren't having really a real fight. He was just pitching a temper tantrum. They were still on the same side. He was just venting his anger. He wasn't actually trying to kill him. So it's a little bit different. And so basically, he dies. Now the series continues after that, because in the next issue, issue 13, Joshua takes up his father's armaments and becomes the new warlord. And the series only lasted a few issues after that. Here's Joshua as the warlord. 15. And then the last issue is 16. Fantastic, fantastic covers by Mike Grell on these. Just absolutely great. I think he did the art on these last two issues as well. The previous ones, he was just doing the writing and the covers. And the last two issues, I think he did the art. But there you have it. So if you've gotten this far, 32 years with this subplot. I had a chance to meet Mike Grell after the end of this at a convention. I had to sign some stuff, and I told him, I was like, thank you so much for coming back to DC and doing this series to finally wrap up that damn subplot. I've been waiting 30 years for you to wrap up the subplot. And he was basically like, thanks for spending money on this story for 30 years. I'm curious if anybody who's read other, long-running comic book stories, if anyone's aware of any other ongoing subplots that have dragged out this much. Obviously, this lasted longer than Wolverine, but Wolverine's origin, of course, Wolverine was appearing in 1,400 titles every month for 25 years. So that was something that came up much more often just because Warlord wasn't being published for large blocks of time. But still, it's amazing to me that they had this ongoing concern with the character for over 3 decades before they finally resolved it. And it is a little bit hilarious in the way that they resolved it. But thank God they finally did. So let me know if you know of any other really long-running subplots. I'd love to hear about other ongoing subplots that dragged on that long. Of course, Chris Claremont in X-Men was famous for just putting in breadcrumbs and dragging out these subplots for years and years and years. I think mainly because he didn't have any idea where they were going. But I'm sure there must be others that also, dragged out for a long time. I'm just not aware of any, like this, where it was a continual plot point throughout the series, and just kept going and was brought up over and over and over again without ever resolving it. So let me know if you know of any of that. So thanks very much for watching. I'll be back with another video in a few days, and I'll see you then.